The angle that most lawyers come at things from is problems. No one rings me and says, Frank, just ringing, we bought 12 months ago, everything's going great.
Yeah.
Doesn't happen. They ring me when they've got problems. Like, these things aren't just black and white businesses. They're organic creatures in a sense, with committees and owners and your body corporate manager involved and all that sort of stuff. So if you come in and simply impose your will the way you want it done, and there's a whole heap of change without the change management that sometimes needed to go with that, that's going to set people off. To me, when you're about to spend $1.5–2 million more on a business and the value of that business is tied irretrievably to the validity of those agreements. You want someone that knows what they're doing.
Absolutely.
And there's so many little things that can slip between the cracks.
So Frank Higginson, thank you for joining us today from Hynes Legal. You're very well known in the industry. You've been around for a number of years. I won't mention how many years.
Mate,
but
that's fine. I don't mind.
one of the few leading legal and professionals and industry experts that are quite willing to put your content, your knowledge online. What started this, Frank?
I suppose I've always been interested in, marketing or selling, you know what I mean? So I think ultimately we're all selling something.
Yeah.
So you're selling other people's management rights businesses, I'm selling my legal services. And when I started this, my marketing content 20 odd years ago, we didn't have iPhones. Interweb was around, but it wasn't as connected as what it is now. I think YouTube hadn't started. So I just started producing written content because at that stage, not a lot of people knew who I was.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to get around the state to let people know who you are. So started a little database, started producing content that I think was relevant to people in the management rights industry and then later in the body corporate industry. So I think if you waste people's time by sending them stuff that's time wasting, again, for want of a better analogy, they just ignore you. But if you produce stuff that they're interested in, that is relevant, that comes across our desk every day, it actually makes their lives a bit easier. Certainly made my life a bit easier, in terms of getting people to know who I was, but also allowing me to just send people content when they ask me the same questions I get every other week. So if you go way back to the start, one of the very early ones I wrote was about losing a unit from your letting pool on less than 90 days notice, which it was under PAMDA. And what do you do, and can we sue people and that sort of stuff? And the answer is theoretically, yes, you can do all these things, but practically, just let it go. So that newsletter, because I get that question still once a month, and that newsletter I've sent out hundreds of times to people. Read this, come back to me if you've got any questions. So I don't need to charge people for that. That's the answer. That's the commercial way to approach it. And I suppose in theory, it's a bit of marketing, bit of time saving, bit of a thought bubble, bit of my opinion on what's going on. So, and it just sort of evolved from there. So now,
I must admit, I actually had a bit of a look on your web profiles and all your channels, and I was actually really amazed that all that content was so freely available. So it's a credit to you, Frank. Well done.
Thank you, mate.
Frank, I want to know your interpretation and your beliefs. What is management rights? Let's start at the very start. Explain to us what management rights is from your profession.
Cool. Well, what it was probably 25, 30 years ago when I was starting this stuff is a little bit different to what it's become today, you know. So back then it was the typical mum and dad operation. I think today that same model, I think, is still the best model. And I know from a broker's perspective and financier's perspective and finance broker's perspective and bank's perspective, it's getting harder with more valuable real estate, because what has definitely changed really since COVID is the value of real estate's gone through the roof everywhere. And that is making that traditional model of living on site with your caretaking and letting and effectively living with your mistakes, in a sense, less viable or less attractive. And maybe they're two sides of the same coin. So
I think we talk about return on investment all the time. And that disparity there between the property value and the business value doesn't always necessarily correlate.
No, I know. And it's that return on investment, which is sort of our industry multiplier is another way, 4 times is 20% or 25% and so on. That wasn't the way they were sold 20 odd years ago, because it was always a lifestyle choice. So buy a unit, you don't need any degree qualifications, you can get there and be good with people and away you go, and you sort of buy yourself a business, you trundle away, you got somewhere to live. The ROI stuff And don't get me wrong, it's a fundamental part of anyone's investment decision, and it is part of the program, but I think it's become more of the program now from a selling perspective than it ever was.
Mm-hmm.
And even I sometimes ask clients, when they bought and 3 years later they're selling, if you don't mind me asking, what's the trigger?
Yeah.
And even we had one, I still remember it, up on the north side of Brisbane, where they'd been there, the business was running well, no problems, topped up, happy days. So, why are you going? So we'll go and say, well, we moved down here. Our daughter's at uni. We wanted somewhere for her to stay and study. And now she's finished, she's graduated, so we can go back up north.
Yeah, right.
So that for them, financials were part of it, but lifestyle was definitely a much bigger part of it in terms of supporting their daughter.
Yeah.
And I think if we keep driving towards that return on investment as being the primary driver, that becomes business onlys. And I don't deep down think that actually helps the management rights industry at its core, because suddenly then everything's off-site and you don't quite have that same link.
Yeah.
So that's my fear.
Yeah, and I think we also open another Pandora's box question with decoupling, but we won't do that right now because that's a whole other topic. Yeah. Management rights is something that you, in your profession, would see the good and the bad, the uglies, and everything in between in operators.
Yeah.
Tell us some of the skills and traits of a typically successful operator.
Communication. That's number one, without any doubt. And I think communication skills, and that's verbal, that's written, and probably even cultural connection, I think helps enormously, just to understand where people are coming from.
Yep.
The other one is then knowing what your job is and what your role is. I think...
Also good one for the committee too.
Yeah, mate, absolutely. Yeah. This is, and part of it is understanding where, I suppose, people's desires, because as a manager, you're contracted to the body corporate to provide a service. Mm-hmm. That service is set out in the management rights agreement, so knowing those agreements is absolutely a fundamental part of it. But recognising sort of who's in control, I think, is sometimes the issue. So, and I suppose through the decades of it, thousands of disputes hit my desk. Some of the more difficult ones where the manager does what they think is the right thing, but they've done it without committee instruction. So a prime example might be there's a whole bunch of palm trees on the northern boundary, full of seed pods, full of bats, full of cockroaches. Manager just goes and arranges a quote, knocks them over, and committee says, what are you doing? So that's not understanding your role. Your role, you mightn't like them. You might go to the committee and say, hey, we've got all these problems. Yeah. But the ultimate decision maker in relation to removal of those trees is the committee. Yeah. So
unless stated in your caretaking agreement.
Well, it's very rare that would be there.
Yeah.
Knock over trees. Maybe pulling out some shrubs and stuff, maybe. Sure. Yeah. But even then, it's sort of that knowing your role is, in a sense, a manager is to a committee what we are to a client. We act on instructions. Yeah. So due diligence, we're not signing off until the client says, yep, that's fine. Mm-hmm. We're not doing it because we think it's okay. We wait for the client to tell us it's okay. And I think sometimes managers trying to do the right thing or not understanding what the position actually... Right. Absolutely it is. Like no one's running around trying to pick fights unless you're a complete psychopath, and they do exist. Most people aren't trying to do that, but that's where I think a lot of the fights actually start.
Interesting. What are some of the rookie mistakes people coming into the industry for the first time may sort of, stumble upon or find themselves making mistakes? What do you think those are?
I think that still comes, it's the same sort of stuff. It's doing things that they don't know they shouldn't be doing. Right. Like for me, that Rumsfeld quote, do it all the time, the known knowns, the unknown unknowns. Yeah. It's the unknown unknowns that kill people. Yeah. And even in my business career, you go back and look at some of the things you did and you go, crikey, dodged a bullet on that one. It's lucky afterwards. Yeah. But from a manager's perspective, it's really not knowing exactly where you sit with people, probably trying, in a sense, sometimes to take too much control, and probably change. Like I think when you take over a business, it is a hell of a lot easier to keep running with whatever the vendor's done. So understanding that, those systems, those processes, whatever it might be, and regardless of whether you think they're right, wrong, or indifferent, and gradually dealing with change. Yeah. Like these things aren't just black and white businesses. They're organic creatures in a sense with committees and owners and your body corporate manager involved and all that sort of stuff. So if you come in and simply impose your will the way you want it done, and there's a whole heap of change without the change management that sometimes needed to go with that, that's going to set people off. Yeah. What are you doing?
Yeah, sure.
And even though what was done previously might not be the right thing, people don't know that. Yeah. This is one of the things in this industry. It's very unsophisticated at times, and people don't actually know what should be happening anywhere. So just handling that stuff really carefully is important.
Now, I think you've sort of covered off on a lot of this, but I'll ask the question anyway because you might have a different spin on it. operational sides of things, an operating partner or operating manager, and the relationship between the committee. Often we see it like a marriage, right?
Yep.
You know, it's great when it's going well,
Yep.
but it's not so good when it's not, right?
Yep.
So what are some of the things that you would recommend for people, you know, trying to foster and harness a positive relationship should focus on with their committees?
Yep. Communications and expectations.
Yeah.
It's no different. We can go back to marriage stuff.
Yeah.
I think the same as it is with marriage, sometimes it's easier to seek forgiveness than ask permission.
Right.
But it's much easier in the long run to ask permission.
Gotcha.
So, you know, drop in, I'm going on a golf trip to my missus for 4 days, taking off tomorrow is not really the right way to deal with her. Putting it in place 3 months ago when it was all organised is the right way to deal with it and manage the expectations accordingly. So I think from a committee perspective, it is also part of understanding what they want. Because again, you're contracted to them. The committee might be completely hands off. Syd, you run the whole thing.
Yeah.
Happy days, you get involved and run it. If the committee is a couple of control freaks on there that want to know what's going on and work to rule and understand process and procedures, then you've got to do that.
Yeah.
So there's nothing in the agreement that's going to set out how to deal with the committee. But I think it's a matter of understanding the personalities and then tailoring your program to fit those personalities because ultimately, you're a service provider. As a manager, you are a service provider. Yes, it's your business. Yes, you've got a contract. Yes, it says you're going to mow the lawn and clean the pool and all that sort of stuff. But it is much easier to work with an active committee and manage their expectations and help them understand what it is that you're doing and why. And that will solve 3/4 of the problems.
We often looked at, you know, finger pointing, such and such, that's your role. Caretaking agreements are there for a reason, right? You know, black and white from start to finish, that's the expectation of a caretaker. It's in your agreement, right? What happens if a manager doesn't perform to the standards required? What are the ramifications and ultimately where does it end up?
Well, that becomes World War III.
Right.
So, like, to me, and this is one of the issues with the lack of specificity in some caretaking agreements. So you go old school agreements, mow the lawn is required. Required by who? To what standard? So if there's no specificity, like we're doing it once a week in summer and once a fortnight in winter, and no understanding between you and me about what that actually means and hedging and weeds and all that sort of stuff, that's where the fights start. It really does start back at that communications expectations piece. So I reckon one of the key skills in management rights, another one, is knowing what red flags. You know what I mean? You all know, you know it personally. When you miss us, it's okay. Oh, what have I done now? You know what I mean? It's that sort of stuff. And you know it from the committee perspective because they'll suddenly start behaving differently. And that's where I think you come back to what Trevor Rawnsley, he coined, as best I can tell, the triangle of management, where a very well-run building with management rights has an active manager, has an engaged body corporate manager, and has an engaged committee. So if all three of those legs of that stool work collectively, everyone knows what everyone else is doing, everyone's talking, everyone's understanding and has an expectation management piece that they all know what's going on. And if there is constant communication, then it stops those things getting out of whack. And so I think, like, one of the things for me with resident managers is making sure that they do have a good relationship with their body corporate manager. Because in a management rights situation, you know, the resident manager's got one building, the strata manager might have 100, subject to how many they're building, so how many they're managing and what company they're with and all that sort of jazz. So I think from a strata manager's perspective, if you can have a good relationship with them and make their life easy and not be difficult and give them what they need to serve it up to the committee, you will be the golden child because you're making their life easy. And so when something might be going wrong, they might be the type of person that will pick up the phone and say, Syd, maybe you should have a chat to the chair about the lawns because there's some rumblings about them not being happy. And as long as if you haven't picked that up, they do that, you go and grab them, say, hey, just let you know what I'm doing. Oh, mate, I'm not happy with this. Problem solved. That's that communication piece again, you know? Because that cuts it off. Because if you don't, and this is the difficulty for us, is these things arrive on our desk probably 6 to 8 months after that first little red flag was raised. So everyone sent snarky emails to each other late at night, using describing words, adjectives, maybe name calling, abusive things, all that sort of stuff. And it just escalates and people get entrenched. And then it leads to you're not doing your job, performance management, remedial action notice, which is a threat to terminate, and
the ugly side
litigation,
of
and it's just,
yeah.
And like to me, the costs are just one part of it.
Yeah.
So, if you're a member of ARAMA, you've got insurance now for this automatically. You can go with EPM or whatever it might be. So there is savings in relation to you not being completely out of your pocket if you're defending one of these things.
Yeah.
But I don't think people factor enough the emotional cost of them.
No.
The sleep at night factor.
The marriage.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the sleep at night factor.
Yeah.
It really, it's
Yeah.
all well and good to say I've got insurance and I'm going to win this fight and all this sort of stuff, but you still, in theory, got your business at risk.
Mm.
How do you go waking up at 3 a.m, not being able to get back to sleep because you're going back on that email you sent 3 months ago?
Yeah, 100%. There's a lot of things you've covered there as well that I look at. I'm in the coalface on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
I'm looking at some of these agreements. I'm going, well, it says maintain the spa, but this complex doesn't have a spa. All these different things that occur, but people not quite pointing them out at the right times. And leads me to our next question. From an experienced buyer to a very green buyer, you as a legal industry expert have a role to play in uncovering and bringing things to a buyer's attention.
Yep.
Explain to us what the DD process means from your point of view.
To me, and I suppose it sort of sounds a bit blasé, but it's not really. Like everyone I go through, there's issues. And some of them are things you need to deal with, some of them aren't. So like literally on my desk at the moment, I've got two. One is a complete, officially the worst drafted set of management rights agreements I've ever seen.
Right.
And because they're attaching 6 different versions of documents over 3 previous new agreements, they forgot one option period.
Right.
So we're 5 years short.
Okay.
So that's a legal thing, you know what I mean? So going through minutes, agreements, what happened, and you go to the lawyer and say, I think you're 5 years short. Oh, yeah, we forgot to attach it. Well,
ouch. Okay.
Yep, so there's stuff like that. There's another one where, and I don't think the seller has actually told their listing agent, here's a performance report that indicates all of the things you're doing wrong.
Oh.
We need a response to this. And we're doing literally due
Christmas
diligence. We're doing due diligence last week. And it's like, well, have you got a response to that?
Mm.
And that's literally on the vendor's desk at the moment. So it's sort of those sort of things. So, the legal one is I've got to say to the client, I can't guarantee you the 5 years is there.
Yeah.
So you can make a decision to proceed, and I don't mind, just in a sense, don't blame me if someone picks it up down the line, but your bank might have a different view because they're going to lend you money based on that term. Mm-hmm. So I suspect that one will go to general meeting. And the performance management one is, well, let's see what the response was. Yeah. Obviously it's helpful that the seller's moving on because the committee will be happy with that. But subject to how burnt they've been by the experience, they're going to look at our client as buyers and say, well, are you going to give us the same experience? So my take on that one, subject to what the response is going to be, is, well, maybe we should meet with the committee before we go unconditional on due diligence so we can all understand expectations, hear their concerns, make sure we can meet what those expectations are, and then we can charge on.
Fantastic.
So it's that sort of, like, to me, that sort of guidance. And I suppose where I'm at with my career is I don't delegate this stuff. I still do all the due diligences. I've seen 40 million things. Yeah. So
in between your 3 golf days a week.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I locked myself away for 4 hours and I'm fine. I just need to not be interrupted during those 4 hours. Yeah. But I think it's that sort of stuff. Yeah. So there's a legal bit to that. There's an operational bit to that. And even actually the first one that's got very fixed office hours in a permanent building. And it's like, that shouldn't be there. Yeah. So if we're going back to general meeting to fix that, then we should change that too. Yeah.
I think it's important to look at the industry as a whole. We scratch the surface on maybe the ugliness or the stuff that's not so positive to the industry. But let's look at the positive stuff that is in management rights. Why is management rights such a resilient industry?
Yeah. And I suppose the angle that most lawyers come at things from is problems. No one rings me and says, Frank, just ringing. We bought 12 months ago. Everything's going great. Yeah. Doesn't happen. No. They ring me when they've got problems. So lawyers can have a slightly jaundiced view about things because all that hits our desk is transactions or problems. So, and we've got, who knows, hundreds of clients lurking around out there that don't need our help until they sell. Yeah. So it's probably just those little bits and pieces in the middle. So I think...
Maybe just to touch on that too and add some to that, getting an industry expert that knows management rights is a huge thing.
100%. To me, when you're about to spend $1.5–2 million more on a business and the value of that business is tied irretrievably to the validity of those agreements, you want someone that knows what they're doing.
Absolutely.
And there's so many little things that can slip between the cracks. So, and that option one's a prime example. So, And same applies from an accounting perspective, same applies from a finance broker perspective, same applies from an agent's perspective. You go and try to buy something from a Ray White, they don't even know the questions to ask their vendor when they're listing the thing that a half-educated buyer is going to ask.
Understand. Yeah.
So when if you surround yourself with people that know what they're doing,
know what to look for.
It'll absolutely make your investment safer and your process far more painless. Yeah. Because again, from people outside the circle, for want of a better phrase, the unknown unknowns, they just don't know.
Correct. Yeah. So, Frank, let's talk about trends, the things you've seen since you started to where we are now.
Yep.
How do you see the space in management rights evolving in the next 5-10 years? Do you see some big things happening with AI, with all the technology, all the tools that are available?
Well, mate, AI I think is the great unknown. I played with ChatGPT when it first arrived, and the free version was rubbish. I'm not going to pay for a paid version. I hopped on DeepSeek the other day, and that thing is amazing.
Right.
That is officially, I asked it some legal questions. So I did the same thing, ChatGPT, asked it a legal question, produced an answer that mixed Queensland and New South Wales legislation and actually ultimately got the answer wrong.
Yeah.
That same question to DeepSeek, spat it out exactly.
Wow.
So I'm
not doing ourselves out of a job.
No. Well, no, I think there's pockets of what I do and what lawyers charge for that may be overridden by that. And I know what the answer is, so I can read it. If you don't know what the answer is, do I trust this thing? That might come. So I think there's multiple applications of AI in relation to drafting correspondence and dealing with listings and words and all that sort of stuff that will make a massive difference. But in terms of management rights, I suppose there's big cycles that come, and they're tied through the years. We're all tied to how the property market goes. We've all got a house somewhere, so the ability to dispose of that house or gear against that house allows us to do other things. So when so for me, I suppose in a business sense, there's the pre and post GFC world. I suppose you might have still been in nappies at that stage or at school. I lived through it, which was interesting down here on the Gold Coast. And then there's the pre and post COVID world. So these big economic curves are I think you've got to ride those waves. So at the moment, I think one of the issues with management rights is decoupling. We're in a sense, moving away from what that model has been for a long period, which I think destabilises the strength of what was one of the core parts of it, living on site, being accountable, all that sort of thing. I think letting pools have been under pressure for a while, with owner-occupiers being the buyers, because the investment lending has slowed down a little bit. That may change as interest rates come back to where they should be and things become a bit more affordable. And even you go back to 2000 when GST arrived, First Home Owners Grant appeared. So that was Liberal Party's answer to affordability for younger people at that stage. And I was down the Gold Coast at that stage, and still a bub, I suppose, it is 25 years ago. We had people losing units from the rental pool everywhere because kids were buying. Here, I'm going to get this $7,000. Prices weren't as high, tax-free, blah, blah, blah. So unit letting pools fell. And then after 18 months, all the kids decided to go FIFO and travel and do all the stuff they did, and they came back into the rental pool. So these cycles come. But you look at management rights from an overall perspective, it's enshrined in legislation. It's been around as a business model now for probably more than 50 years. ARAMA is doing a sensational job to make sure that its legislative position is protected and strengthened. And even sometimes no change is good. So I think in years to come, it'll still be there. I just worry a little bit about the separation of the business from the unit, because I think then it's a harder pitch to sell to committees when you're not there on site. And part of that is that communication / relationship / engagement piece, because it's bloody easy when you wander around doing your job and you see the chairperson, you have a chat. If you don't have those sort of incidental times to chat to people, it just takes away one little core part of that relationship building exercise that I think is really important in any business or industry, but particularly management rights.
You obviously, you're very heavily involved in ARAMA. You've been an advocate for a number of years. There's a lot of things that probably wouldn't have gone so well if ARAMA hadn't been around, or if ARAMA didn't have a seat at the table. There's some big things just across the border that are happening all over the place right now. Where would the industry be without ARAMA?
It'd be dead.
Right.
So, and that's the reality. So, and I believe that management rights works. So, and obviously, people are entitled to their different views. There's some that don't. And sometimes that's a control thing. Sometimes it's just an anti-management rights thing, but whatever. I believe in the industry. I believe the model works. And I believe that if ARAMA had not been there, it would not be the industry that it is today.
Right.
So I think it is critically important for anyone who has an interest in management rights to be a member of ARAMA. So we've been, I suppose, paying members for who knows how long, which is fine. Obviously, on the board, I'm now an advisor of the board. I used to do a lot of the ARAMA roadshows. Sat with Trevor through the Community Title Law Reform Working Group, which was started under the Palaszczuk government, and we dealt with very vehement opposition to long-term management rights agreements, which we've managed and dealt with. And that wasn't just us. There was other contributors to that as well. But without that being there, who knows what would have happened. Yeah. So, but I'd probably say it wouldn't be positive.
Yeah. There's a common theme with our interviews. We've had a few of them. The common theme, in my opinion, would be surround yourself with the right people.
Yeah.
The team that you want to, have in your corner knows and understands the industry.
Yeah.
Frank, it's been very insightful today. Thank you very much for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Cheers.